van Niekerk for the session today. We're all very excited to find more out about the couple simulation. So over to you, because it's between answers and Flownex couple simulation, and we really just want to understand more what you've done and how this can be applied to the industry. So thanks, Christoph.
Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you very much for the introduction. So this research forms part of my master's degree program, where I investigated the design and analysis of a natural draft dry cooling system for an SCO2 power plant. So just to start off with, global energy systems are transitioning towards a more sustainable and renewable energy technologies, which typically consist of solar PV panels and wind farms. But as these two technologies are quite significantly dependent on on-site local weather data, weather conditions, they sometimes suffer performance losses during unfavorable conditions. This is where concentrated solar power integrated with thermal energy storage can help provide stable power even during adverse conditions. This effectively mitigates commonly related dispatchability and variability issues to that of other renewable energy technologies, and can help us diversify South Africa's renewable energy generation fleet. So concentrated solar power technologies use large mirrors called heliostats to direct the sun's energy to a focal point, which heats up some form of a heat transfer fluid, and then that's stored in a thermal energy storage system, which can later then be deployed to drive a steam turbine generator and provide us with some renewable generated power. However, there's still some quite drawbacks of this technology because it's quite expensive, and that's reducing the widespread adoption into industry. So it's worthwhile to go and look at how we can potentially reduce these costs. And recent research suggests integrating a supercritical carbon dioxide power system into the power block of these plants, as they have some potential to reduce the overall costs of these power plants. So supercritical carbon dioxide is effectively CO2 above its critical temperature and pressure, well into the superheated region above the vapor dome, where the CO2 has the density of a liquid and the viscosity of the gas. And these favorable thermodynamic properties allow for the design turbomachinery components of this power cycle to have a much smaller footprint in comparison to a steam turbine drivetrain. And just to illustrate this, the bottom figure shows a 250 megawatt steam turbine drivetrain, and that little red dot there in the bottom corner, that's an SCO2 turbine of an even larger power output. So it's quite a significantly large reduction in size, and this can directly translate into reduced costs of these power plants. In addition to this, these technologies have been shown to integrate very well with dry cooling. And as CSP plants are typically located in desert regions where water is scarce and minimizing the water consumption of the power plant is a priority, we can now start to look at how we can integrate a dry cooling system into one of these SCO2 power plants. So dry cooling generally consists of either mechanical draft ACCs or natural draft indirect dry cooling technologies, where mechanical draft ACCs use multiple large diameter axial flow fans to drive air across the condensing tubes. However, these drivetrains do generate quite a bit of unwanted noise and vibrations, leading to regular maintenance and inspections, which increases the downtime and operational cost of the power plant. Additionally, these drivetrains also consume quite a bit of power during operation, which in turn minimizes the total sent out power by the power plant. However, the direct condensation process boasts higher thermal efficiencies for these type of power configurations. Now, natural draft indirect dry cooling systems use buoyancy-driven flow to drive air across the air-cooled heat exchangers situated in the base of the cooling tower. This mitigates the need for fan drivetrains and minimizes the operational power consumption of the plant. However, these cooling systems require additional shell and tube condensing heat exchangers connected to pumping networks to cool down the turbine exhaust steam, which increases the system complexity. However, and these systems are quite of a very large scale, which needs substantial capital investment cost to build them, which reduces their adoption into industrial cooling technologies. So recent industry and research trends showcase the use of a natural draft, a direct dry cooling system, where the low pressure turbine exhaust steam is directly cooled in the air-cooled heat exchangers situated in the base of the tower, And we can, these cooling technologies aim to combine the operational benefits of both dry cooling technologies, and therefore we can explore this for SCO2 power plants. However, there is a unique challenge when it comes to the modeling and designing of these SCO2 cooling systems, as during cooling, the thermodynamic properties of SCO2 significantly vary, which makes the use of typical lump parameter modeling approaches quite inaccurate. For example, when looking at the specific heat of SCO2 across 4 different pressures, the SCO2 cools down and reaches near the critical point where the specific heat can vary by 1 to 2 orders of magnitude. This makes the prediction of the heat transfer and pressure drop quite difficult to do with lump parameter models, and therefore we need discretized heat exchangers to accurately account for those property variations. So historic research on natural draft direct dry cooling systems for SCO2 applications only consider one-dimensional modeling techniques and off-design temperature operation. We've seen with detailed CFD models of natural draft cooling systems that there's a formation of recirculation, flow separation, and uneven velocity distributions over the heat exchangers, which all contribute to lower heat transfer rates, which the 1D models can't account for. We've also seen that crosswinds significantly deteriorate the performance of natural draft cooling systems, which haven't been explored for SCO2 applications. So the need arises to develop a model that can account for complex airflow as well as the corresponding effects on the SCO2 side. So our objective of this work was to develop a 3D CFD model of the air side coupled to a discretized 1D process model of the SCO2 heat exchangers to co-simulate the system performance during no wind and windy conditions. So this research forms part of a larger research objective at Stellenbosch University looking into SCO2 power cycles, and we specifically consider the design and evaluation of a cooling system for a 50 megawatt partial cooling with reheat cycle. So this cycle features 2 expansion and compression stages with an intercooler and reheater, and we specifically chose this cycle due to its good balance between operating thermal efficiency and comparative lower overall component costs in comparison to other cycle arrangements. And in this case, we also combined both the cooling heat exchangers, so that's the pre-cooler and the intercooler, into the same cooling tower configuration. The cooling tower we used consists of a hyperbolically shaped cooling tower with vertically arranged heat exchanger tube banks around the circumference of the cooling tower. Here, we employ a circular fin tube heat exchanger where both the pre-cooler and intercooler uses this airside configuration. So during the design phase of the project, which I won't be covering in this presentation, the tower had to reject the cycle heat load to achieve an outlet temperature of 45 degrees Celsius for both heat exchangers. And just to explore a bit of a larger design space, we completed a parametric study varying some key geometric features. And at the end of the day, we ended up with a 55-meter high tower. So for the SCO2 flow arrangement, each individual tube bank consists of makes up the total cooling tower inlet height, where the same circular fin tube heat exchanger is stacked on top of one another. In this case, the SCO2 flow arrangement makes up and approximates a multi-pass cross-counterflow heat exchanger to ensure that there's a larger temperature difference between the air side and SCO2 side. So the flow configuration is made up of a number of transverse tubes along the height of the tube bank and a number of longitudinal tubes along the airflow direction, which in total makes up the total SCO2 flow passes. So to illustrate this, we'll just look at an 8-pass SCO2 flow arrangement where the hot SCO2 enters at the back of the heat exchanger in the airflow direction, is then passed to the tube below it, and then from there passes into the next set of tube rows in the airflow direction, where this pattern is repeated until exiting at the front of the heat exchanger in the airside at the airside inlet. Using this definition, we could vary the number of SCO2 side tube passes during the parametric study to ensure that we designed an effective heat exchanger. And at the end of the day, we selected an 8-pass arrangement for the pre-cooler and a 24-pass arrangement for the intercooler. So with the defined geometry, we can now integrate it into the co-simulation model, which consists of an airside CFD model developed in ANSYS Fluent and a discretized 1D heat exchanger network model developed in Flownex. And the main interface between these two models is selected as the mean tube bank wall temperature of each individual tube bank in the domain. So to illustrate this, we'll just consider the heat transfer modeling of a single tube bank situated around the tower. So The SCO2 side, solved by the discretized element-based model, uses the effectiveness NTU approach to determine the heat transfer. Here, the convective heat transfer for a single increment along the flow path of a tube bank is solved from the incoming SCO2 to the tube wall. Using this approach, we can accurately capture the logarithmic variation of temperature through the heat exchanger, and after that, we can then determine the mean tube bank wall temperature of that individual tube bank. This information is then sent to the airside CFD, where the heat transfer is solved with a volumetric energy system with an porous media, which represents the tube banks. And after running the CFD model, we could then obtain the corresponding total heat transfer coming into the air from that tube bank, which we can then send back to the process model to iteratively update the tube bank wall temperatures. So just to illustrate how this procedure then works, so I use the Python script, which calls PyFluent to connect to the CFD model, and a Flownex Python API to communicate to the process model. And the COSIM script starts by loading the respective Flownex and Fluent files, whereafter we set a number of co-simulation iterations, and then the main loops begins by solving the discretized process model and extracting the mean tube bank wall temperatures, which we can then pass to the CFD model via Python, and then that updates the energy source terms in the CFD model. The CFD model is then instructed to complete a few iterations, and after that, we can then calculate the total heat transfer entering the air, which is then passed via Python into Flownex again, and then updates the process and updates these wall temperatures until we've established convergence between the two models. And this was done by just monitoring the governing equation residuals in Fluent, as well as overall performance parameters such as the total heat transfer and air mass flow rate. And now just to illustrate what this looks like practically, I'll just run through some of the pseudocode. So just to start off with, one needs to include the Python API Flownex library in the directory of your Python file when you want to run this type of co-simulation, as well as the open source PyFluent package. And these do allow the communication between the different software packages. So the code starts in the main loop by pointing to and running the discretized heat exchanger network. And then from there, after it solves, we can extract the tube bank wall temperatures from Flownex. And this is just done by using the function get output, which is just a standard function in the Flownex API, and then pointing to the individual element that you would want to then get that value from. Then I apply the temperature relaxation factor, similarly to how Fluent applies its under relaxation factors, just to ensure some solution stability. And after that, I could transfer the wall temperatures back to Fluent by using the named expressions, and then run the Fluent simulation, extract the heat transfer values from Fluent by, again, using the named expression values, and then send the updated heat transfer values to Flownex with the following function. And then I could, in the code, also check the changes in wall temperature between successive COSIM iterations, as well as the SCO2 outlet temperature and pressure drops. So the airside CFD model consists of a half a tower with large enough enclosure to approximate the atmosphere. And the model employs a simple pressure velocity coupling and spatially discretizes the pressure in the domain via Presto and a second order upward for the other solution variables. The K-Omega SFT model with enhanced wall functions is used to solve the turbulence in the domain. And as indicated in the figure, for the boundary conditions in the no-wind case, we supply pressure outlet on the sides and a pressure inlet, pressure outlet on the top and a pressure inlet on the side. And the pressure inlets both get a pressure gradient, which we derive from the ideal gas law equation of state, just to accurately solve the density variation in the domain. And then for the crosswind conditions, we supplied a typical wind velocity profile on one of the inlets, and then the corresponding side would get a pressure outlet with the same pressure gradient. And then the heat exchangers in the domain use a porous media formulation, and we also included a momentum system, which includes component characteristics to solve the airflow across the fin tube heat exchanger more accurately. And then finally, to ensure that our model is accurate, we completed a grid convergence index calculation and ended up choosing a 70 million cell mesh. For the SCO2 side process model, In Flownex, which consists of the discretized heat exchanger network, this effectively just takes the flow path of an individual heat exchanger and divides it into multiple 1D heat exchanger elements with a defined area and length. So this approach allows us to capture the property gradients in a single tube bank, as well as determine potential maldistribution effects to the individual tube banks around the circumference of the tower. So from the figure, each individual tube bank represents a section of the heat exchanger where this heat source is applied, which is then determined by the CFD side of the co-simulation model. And this can allow us to solve the correct temperature distribution through each of these tube banks, which we can then calculate the mean wall temperature for each of these ones. And with regards to the boundary conditions, we developed a cycle model to obtain the inlet stagnation and temperatures for both the pre-cooler and the intercooler. And just to stay consistent with the symmetrical boundary condition applied in the CFD model, we only added half of the design point SO2 mass flow rate to each of the heat exchangers. So looking at the results, we could compare our results with previous work. We only consider a 1D model, and we see a 13% difference in heat transfer and a 6% difference in overall air mass flow rate. And these discrepancies are a result of the 1D model not being able to capture some of the complex flow effects that we see in the CFD. For example, if we look at the top figure, we see this large recirculation vortex forming in front of the heat exchanger tube banks, which effectively reduces the amount of air mass flow rate that can flow through the heat exchangers. And this reduction in air mass flow rate causes a reduction in heat transfer rate. And this vortex also causes an increase in overall air inlet temperature across the heat exchanger tube banks, which we can see with this maldistribution of air temperature across the front of the heat exchangers in the same area as where this vortex is, which further reduces the overall heat transfer. And furthermore, we can see this flow separation from the internal tower shell, which causes a further reduction in overall heat transfer. So we could also use the co-simulation model to study the varying of the locations of the different heat exchanger tube banks around the circumference of the tower. And the first configuration we looked at was a lump configuration where the pre-cooler tube banks and intercooler tube banks are grouped together. And the second one was an alternating approach where the different tube banks are interspersed. So the idea here was to see if it's actually worthwhile to include the alternating arrangement, which will provide better buoyancy force distributions and better airflow mixing within the cooling tower and allow for enhanced performance. But this would then need additional piping to deliver the SO2 to the different heat exchangers in the practical application. So from our results, we could actually see quite a bit of, like a small difference in performance recovery for the alternating geometry in comparison to the lump geometry. So we had to extend the analysis to crosswind simulations to establish which one of these two arrangements would actually be better to implement into future power plants. So to do so, we considered the four following crosswind simulation scenarios. Cases A, B, and C correspond to the lumped geometry, where case A has the crosswind blowing from the left to right into the pre-cooler, case B with the crosswind from the right to left blowing into the intercooler, and C with the crosswind blowing from the top down into both the pre-cooler and intercooler. However, in this case, the effect is not symmetrical, and we actually had to extend the model to include a full tower in the domain. And then finally, case D, which is the alternating geometry with just the crosswind blowing from the left to the right. And in this case, the flow is assumed to be symmetrical, so we only consider this one crosswind direction. So for the full tower simulation, we just used the same approach as the previous, as the symmetrical domain, and we ended up with a 33.8 million cell mesh, which meant I had to complete the simulations on the Center for High Performance Computing. And there, Charles helped me set up the simulation using PyFluent again, which one can then send the job script to the high performance cluster and then run the large simulation on the cluster. And we actually see quite a small difference between the symmetrical tower and the full tower domain, which effectively helps us establish that we can use this half-tower symmetrical simulation scenarios for future work, and significantly reduces our simulation time and overall complexity of the model. So now we can just look at some of the crosswind results. So we know that crosswinds significantly deteriorate the heat rejection capability of the cooling tower. And this is effectively just illustrated by the formation of flow separation and flow stagnation in these middle and leeward sectors of the tube banks, which is increasingly severe for the high wind velocity cases. This reduces the overall air mass flow rate that can pass through these tube banks, which reduces the heat transfer. And we can use the co-simulation model to investigate the heat rejection rates of each individual heat exchanger tube bank with the use of a heat map. So this top right figure plots the different heat rejection rates for each individual tube bank in the domain, starting with the no wind case in the inner ring and then moving out to the different crosswind velocities from there. So in this case, the blue corresponds to the pre-cooler and the orange corresponds to the intercooler. And from these heat transfer plots, we can see that the tube banks in the windward direction actually perform a lot better than the rest due to the air that's being forced over these tube banks, enhancing their heat transfer. And then we can see for the middle and leeward sectors that there's quite a significant reduction in heat transfer as the flow starts to separate and reduces the air mass flow rate and then reduces the overall heat transfer that these tube banks can reject. We do see an interesting effect though. Here at the back, we have some performance recovery for the 6 meter per second crosswind, which is effectively due to the flow that starts to separate from these rear tube banks, forming a low velocity zone and then increases the local pressure in that zone. That then allows the tower to re-entrain some air across those tube banks, allowing for the small performance recovery that we see. It is interesting to see that this effect is not sustained for the 9 meters per second case, but it's explained by this very large rotating vortex structure that impedes any formation of high pressure zones at the outside of the cooling tower. And now we could take these results and then go look at what the effects are on the SO2 side of the heat exchangers. So this is shown by the second heat map, where we plot the different SO2 side mass flow rates to each individual tube bank situated around the tower, and just using the same concentric ring approach as the heat rejection rates. And in this case, we see that the SO2 side mass flow rates actually track the heat rejection rate plots, and this is simply due to the tube banks rejecting more heat lowers the internal SO2 gas temperature, which results in a higher density in these tube banks, and that causes the internal velocities to drop, and then the pressure dropping through those tube banks as well. So then what happens, the system responds by balancing the momentum across each one of these tube banks, and then directs more of the SO2 mass into the tube banks with the higher heat transfer rates. And then just for interest sake, I made a little animation here. So Fluent actually allows the user to export images while running the simulation, and then you can just compile them into a video. And in this case, we can see, we can actually see the formation of this like flow separation and Volkmann vortex shredding at the back of the tower. And we can actually see this internal vortex structure moving around in the tower due to the high velocity crosswind speed. And this just illustrates how complex and three-dimensional these flow effects are during crosswinds of these type of cooling systems. Thank you very much. I hope you guys enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you very much, Christoph. I'm sure everybody enjoyed it. It was very much valuable information. So thanks for sharing all of it. Yes, I can see some handshakes